The workers of the world today, all of us in fact, who are engaged in any kind of work, are working in very different ways than our parents or our grandparents did. Now we need to deal with extraordinary complexity in the workplace. We need to deal with multiple tasks. We need to deal with different types of people who are our co-workers, different types of people who are our customers, different people who are our bosses, different people who report to us. We need to deal with that complexity in successful ways, to be able to negotiate meaning, to use multimodal tools in our communication, to be able to apply ourselves in productive ways so that we are satisfied as workers and our responsibilities are able to be fulfilled in a workplace that is productive, that is socially pleasant to be in, and meets all its goals.
What about work? How does the agenda of literacy sit into the agenda of socialising children to become good workers, effective workers, to get a job? Perhaps we'll put it that way. What I want to do is I want to make a kind of a contrast between what literacy originally was in the first phases of mass compulsory education compared to the objectives of literacy today, the workplace and employment objectives of literacy. And the case I'm going to make is in fact that it's quite different these days. Let's do a little thumbnail sketch of modern work at the point at which mass institutionalised education was created. And don't forget, mass institutionalised education is quite new. It's really a phenomenon of the 19th century, and it wasn't until the 20th century that nearly everybody in the whole world as a child went to school. Okay, so in that first time, what was the classical objectives in terms of work? Well, let's take an example like Henry Ford's motor car factory. This was a typical factory, a typical workplace in the industrial era. And in fact, that workplace was designed around absolutely minimal skills, workplace skills, and minimal literacy. So you were on a production line where an engineer had divided up all the production processes into tiny little bits. So there you were screwing this bolt on, and the next person screwed the next bolt on as the car went along the production line, and by the time it had been past, 1,000 workers, the whole thing had been assembled. Now, in fact, the literacy skills in this kind of environment were really, really minimal. So, in fact, what schools needed to produce for a majority of the population was not much at all. Perhaps, read a danger sign, read a notice. Very, very, very minimal. So, in a way, what we call the old basics were, a minimal set of basic skills for getting around in this kind of workplace. And there was a very, very small elite, which were the supervisors and the bosses and the engineers, who might have gone on to higher education and who might need higher level literacy skills. But in fact, the whole system was based around not very high literacy skills for a majority of the people who came out at the end. Now, what was really important was not literally the skills of literacy, but the skill of turning up to school on time, behaving yourself, doing as you're told. The discipline of the classroom became very much like the discipline of the factory. Punctuality, reliability, doing as you're told. The teacher stood at the front, said, do this, give the right answer, don't talk back. So there was a whole kind of set of disciplinary practices which were learned in the traditional, or not the traditional, the early modern schools, which sort of aligned with these kinds of workplaces. So it didn't really matter how much you learned as long as you were a well-behaved person who were prepared to operate effectively when the boss told you something or the supervisor ordered you to do something, and so on. So that's really a very, very sort of simple thumbnail sketch of the kind of literacy skills and the kind of literacy that was designed for these kinds of workplaces. Now, what have we got today? Well, in fact, things have changed a lot. Classically now, if you work even in a car factory, what you're doing is much more complex. You might be a member of a team, you might have to be multi-skilled, you might have to do problem solving and troubleshooting, quality control and whatever. So the literacy skills are much higher, including probably a lot of screen skills a lot of the time as well. So, entering data on a screen, looking at the, what's happening on a computer screen, and so on. So, very different set of literacy skills, but also a different set of dispositions. So, ideally in this kind of modern workplace, which is often, by the way, called the post-Fordist workplace, as a contrast to the Fordist workplace. Well, in these kind of workplaces, that we want people ideally who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, people who take initiative, people who work collaboratively in teams. So it's a different kind of literacy skills, but also a different kind of set of sensibilities which fit with this new kind of workplace. Now, this kind of workplace is often called the workplace of the new economy, the knowledge economy. And of course, there's a lot of employment, not just in factories. I'm talking about the changes that might be happening in a factory, but a lot of employment in service industries, in IT, in tourism. And these are things, again, where the requirements in terms of literacy skills are quite different from what they were in the era of mass institutionalized education. What I don't want to do is paint a rosy picture of these new workplaces. Things aren't always all that good. There's often less job security. There's still an awful lot of low-paid jobs in the labour force. The people who wash dishes, the people who clean houses, people who are carers. There are an awful lot of poorly paid jobs as well, which actually require quite low literacy skills. So when our schools don't do very well, and when poor schools fail kids, it kind of works in terms of the system in an unfortunate kind of way, in that these become people who end up in these very vulnerable, low-paid, insecure types of jobs. And also, look, we're in a situation too where, despite the fact that in these new workplaces it looks like there's a team, these are the new knowledge economy workplaces. They're often places where people are very vulnerable, likely to lose their job at any time because of restructuring. So it's often not an ideal situation in which perhaps a larger objective around literacy is not just to create students who will fit into a job and be good workers, but also people who can think critically about how they organise their lives, how they negotiate all these kinds of difficulties, and perhaps think critically about how can we improve the nature of work? How can we act to improve the kind of workplaces that we're in? We're not just trying to think about literacy as something which is purely functional to make these workplaces work, but people who've got a bigger vision about their life and the nature of work.